Welcome to One Star Bazaar, where we review the movies critics hate. This week, we're looking at a spoof movie with a large cult following, Kung Pao Enter the Fist. Directed by Steve Oedekerk, written by Steve Oedekerk, starring Steve Oedekerk, Fei Lung and Jennifer Tung, and came out in theaters, which I think is surprising, in 2002.
This film has a 13% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 14% on Metacritic.
So this is one of the rare cases where both sites strongly agree on where this film should be.
Right, because a lot of times one is maybe like 30 and one is 45. There's a little bit of leeway depending on the way their algorithm weights different reviews. But in this case, they both agree this is a pretty bad film.
It's not great, is what they say. All right. So obviously, this movie can't really follow the same critique criteria that we usually use, because when it comes to things like the acting and the story, it's all very
nonsensical.
Yes.
When it comes to the story, it's definitely nonsensical, right?
But, right.
It's a parody, satire, whatever you want to call it, that they've cobbled together out of footage from another film. And so any amount that the story doesn't make sense, to some degree, that's intentional.
Right. Yeah.
So you can't necessarily judge it and say, oh, the story doesn't make any sense, or, oh, it doesn't have a story, because that's the point.
And, I mean, even though it did kind of cobble it together from the available footage, it did still have a story.
I mean, it did. It was...
Yeah. And I think with the story they concocted out of the available footage, it's still a followable story. Like, it's still relatively coherent, despite the random, kind of funny things they put in.
If I were going to critique this like in a normal way,
right,
I would say probably one of the weaknesses is that the villain, Betty, does not have necessarily motivation, or you don't understand why he's doing what he does. In the end, they kind of explain it, but at the same time, it's like ridiculous. But that's the point.
Right.
Is the reveal of, who's the shadowy force behind him.
Yeah. And then in terms of the acting, again, there's really just Steve Oedekerk. You can't judge the acting from the original film that they're cutting in. And obviously his acting is over the top, but it's supposed to be over the top.
Right. That's another time where it's intentionally ridiculous to an extreme level, because that's where a lot of the humor comes from.
Yeah. So I think, in my mind, there's no doubt that this is one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen, but that didn't take away from the enjoyment of it.
Right. You can understand now why this movie became a cult film.
Yes.
And the thing about cult films is, in the moment, a cult film is like a meme. You don't know when it starts that it's going to become a viral thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think of famously Roger Ebert, one of the great film critics, right? Very famous. When The Big Lebowski came out, he hated that movie. He thought it was so dumb. Well, 20 years later, he basically had to admit, okay, I didn't get it at the time, but it is a good movie because it became a cult film. It's so quotable. Mm-hmm. It's, beloved by a lot of people, especially because, of course, it's the Coen brothers, and they've made a lot of great films over the years. And so, but yeah, my point is, at the time, he didn't realize, oh, this movie is going to be a significant film. He just thought, I don't understand this. This is stupid. I think that's the case with a lot of cult films. You don't realize it's going to take off and become its own, take on a life of its own, if you will. And, that's kind of the case here. One issue that I have in calling this a 1-star movie or a bad movie is that this is a parody overlay of another movie.
Right.
Exactly like I would say Mystery Science Theater does, where they're adding a comedic element on top of an existing bad film.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the source material might be pretty dumb, and even a lot of the jokes might fall flat, but at the same time, I think there's a lot more leeway to give a film like this or like a Mystery Science Theater because they are working within that construct. You can only do so much.
Yeah, and I think, what they've done with it is hilarious. So yeah, I don't think you can really look at this from a traditional film perspective because it is just working with another movie. But I think they definitely deserve creativity points for what they've been able to create out of that movie.
Right. So like take a Mystery Science Theater film, like really like famously.
Manos,
the Hands of Fate, right?
Yeah.
Very famous, considered one of the worst films ever made. It was made like back in the 50s or 60s. It's in black and white. They did it on an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Is it a bad movie? Yes. But if you're watching the Mystery Science Theater movie of Manos, the Hands of Fate, is that a bad movie?
No.
Not necessarily, no. Because, again, it's a different experience. Even though it's essentially a movie overlaid on top of another movie.
Right, and then I definitely think that for our fourth category, the when it was over, did we wish we hadn't watched, or was it an enjoyable movie-going experience? I think it was definitely enjoyable. Like, there were a few points where I was like, I feel like it's kind of long, or like, this is kind of stupid. But I think overall, it was funny, it was engaging, and sometimes you're just like laughing at how ridiculous it is. But it's still a fun movie to watch.
There are parts of this that are dumber than other parts, right?
Yes.
I felt like the weakest parts was when they were specifically parodying other films.
Yeah.
So they parody The Matrix.
They spoofed The Lion King.
Those are the parts where I was like, okay, this is where it's crossing over into the bad film territory.
Right.
This is where you're getting into I think the first Scary movie is probably okay, but like the later Scary movies, the Meet the Spartans, the Disaster movie, like all those films.
As long as you're not about to diss Not Another Teen Movie, because that one is hilarious.
Okay. My point is, the bad elements of this definitely overlap with the bad parody movies that we've had for the last 15, 20 years.
And I feel like, too, I think you make a good point where, like, watching this now, we get it because we saw the things back then that it's referencing.
Right.
Whereas somebody now who hasn't seen those movies and is watching this for the first time probably isn't going to get some of those.
Right.
Like, I think it doesn't age well because it is so of the zeitgeist.
Well, and it also
era.
takes away from what makes this movie funny that I respect is that it is, in fact, the ridiculousness, the nonsensical kung fu film aspects.
Yeah, it does stay very true to what a kung fu film is.
What I find funny, legitimately funny, is when they make, as far as their nonsensicalness, whatever.
Nonsensicality.
There you go, nonsensicality. When they make fun of bad dubbing.
They do such a good job of that.
Okay, I would just like to point out that is like a perfect example of the ridiculousness of this movie and the way it makes fun of like dubbed foreign action films like this.
Right.
You have the scene where the guy asks a question of this other guy and he mouths like 3 sentences and the dub is basically like, I don't know. It's so ridiculous.
But can we talk about the scene with the dog?
Oh.
Where they dub the dog. It's so good.
I don't.
You don't remember? Okay, so all the dog does is bark, but like it barks and lays down. So you see the movement of the dog barking and then it laying down, and then like 5 seconds later you actually hear the bark.
Okay,
it's so good.
Yeah, exactly. So they're making fun of bad dubbing. They make fun of like weird jump cuts and continuity errors.
Your shirt's red. Your shirt's black.
Yes, exactly. It's like, I'm a magician. Your shirt is now red. And it's obvious that it's footage they had just spliced in from different scenes, or maybe the original movie had some weird continuity errors or something. They're just making fun of it. That's the stuff that I think is funny.
Yeah, no, it was good.
Speaking of critics, here are some choice excerpts of what many critics of the time had to say about it. Jonathan Foreman of the New York Post said, "It is an inept, tedious spoof of 70s kung fu pictures. It contains almost enough chuckles for a 3-minute sketch and no more." Lawrence Van Gelder of the New York Times said, "To imagine the life of Harry Potter as a martial arts adventure told by a lobotomized Woody Allen is to have some idea of the fate that lies in store for moviegoers, lured to the mediocrity that is Kung Pao, Enter the Fist." Edward Guthman of the San Francisco Chronicle had this to say, "Full of flatulence jokes and mild sexual references, Kung Pao is the kind of movie that's critic-proof simply because it aims so low."
I feel like, one, there weren't that many fart jokes. Like, I've seen movies with way more
That is true.
fart jokes. And then mild sexual references, there's maybe 2?
There's a bunch of scenes where him getting it on with the girl.
But they don't.
No, they don't. But that's the point, is like she flashes him, or she's, yeah, let me get undressed for you. No, wait, no, wait, yes, no,
But
yes,
again,
no.
that's a total of 2 scenes in the movie.
Sure,
It's
but then
not-
there's also the guy.
It's not like Lethal Weapon Lethal Weapon. It's not like Naked Gun where there's like 50,000 overly sexual references.
Or like Airplane, where the pilot is
I've never
joking
seen
about
Airplane.
pedophilia. The kid that's in the cockpit.
Anyway. But yeah, like I feel like for the kind of stupid movie that this is, there usually are more sex jokes and fart jokes. And I feel like this movie was light on both of those. So I don't think this review is valid.
I mean, I agree with the last part.
That
Where
you
it
don't
says
think
it's critic proof because it aims so low. I think that's true.
That's true.
And I think
Yeah, I don't think they were making this movie
No.
because they thought it was going to be a masterful piece of cinema. I think they made it because they knew it was just going to be a fun, dumb movie.
And that's exactly what I like to talk about for a second. There are movies. I'm going to call them like stoner humor.
Yes.
Not because they can only be liked by people who are high.
But
But just because no. But just because the kind of people who like these movies are the kind of people who are basically like young, college age, not fully mature, but they're definitely adults. Like it's not 9-year-olds who love Adam Sandler films.
Yeah.
We're talking about like college students who just dumb humor totally appeals to them.
Yes.
And this is certainly one of those films. I saw this film when I was in college. It was a cult film, or it was becoming a cult film at the time. I think films like Super Troopers, Broken Lizard films fall into the same category. I think they're hilarious, but I totally understand why critics hate them, and they never have good reviews.
What's funny about that, though, is, yeah, I think they appeal to the young, dumb college guy sort of mentality, but they also appeal to, like, my dad. My dad is in his 70s. One of his favorite movies is Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle.
Definitely a stoner movie, considering that's what it's about.
And we showed him Super Troopers, and he loves that kind of humor.
Right.
So I don't think it's necessarily just...
No, it's not like it's only young people can like it.
Yeah.
But the point is, part of the appeal of those films, I think, is because they're so quotable.
Yeah.
which in today's day and age, now that memes are such a thing, just because, and I say that because the word meme was only invented a generation ago or whatever, and really started to understand what a meme is.
Yes,
but now it's definitely, well, I mean, they existed. We just didn't know what to call them.
The internet barely existed when we were
Well, that's my point. Like, stuff like that existed, but they weren't worldwide viral sensations the way that it spreads now.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if a movie like this is a collection of memes,
mm-hmm.
and it's going to turn into just tons of inside jokes, like we were saying, where you just quote it with your friends and they know the next line and then you know the next line. It just becomes this, oh man, that was so funny. Like, we're just repeating it. Like, that appeals to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why people like these movies, because it helps people kind of connect to each other through humor.
Yeah.
Right? For some reason, critics don't get that. Critics hate it. They don't understand why it's funny. I don't know why. I don't want this podcast to just turn into us, like, always trashing what critics say.
Because critics do have valid points.
Here's the thing. Of those 3 reviews I just read, I agree in part with all 3 of them. Right. The first one, Jonathan, the New York Post, basically says, oh, there's enough comedy here for like a short sketch, like an SNL sketch. I'm like, okay, that's fair. There probably is. I mean, I would say more than 3 minutes, because there were legitimately funny things throughout it. Mm-hmm. But I could see how somebody who only thought half as much was funny as I did would basically say, oh, there's like 10 jokes in this film.
And that's one of the things too. I mean, we're not saying that critics are wrong. I think we're just saying that critics sometimes take movies too seriously.
Yes.
And sometimes they're trying to look at every movie like it's trying to win an award, or like every movie needs to be a piece of art.
Right.
You know, some movies are just trying to be dumb, funny movies, and there's nothing wrong with that.
This film definitely qualifies as art, but in the same way that some absurdist piece of art is going to be very different from classic, impressionist,
like it's going to be different. Yeah, modern art is different than stuff you're going to find in
from France 300 years ago, right?
Exactly. Like the art that's really just a pile of garbage, but when you look at it from a certain angle, it's like a bicycle or whatever.
Okay.
I swear that's a thing.
Okay, sure.
It's going to be different than, a masterpiece painting like the Mona Lisa or other things like that. Or like how I don't get the geometric art from like the 60s and 70s, or those the lines with the primary colors. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What is that? I don't get that.
Anyway, yeah. All right.
I get this. Enough. This is funny.
Yeah. Well, this is almost intentionally stupid.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That's kind of the point. And so it's hard to critique it when you're basically saying it's stupid. That's my criticism. And it's like, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. It's supposed to be that way. It's exactly what it was intended to be.
I'm torn because the last couple of movies we've watched, my thought has basically been like, I don't understand why critics hated this so much. Yeah, it's not the greatest movie ever, but it's enjoyable. It's a movie. It's just mindless, kind of typical movie-going fare.
Right, whereas this movie, we can see why critics hated
this movie is way dumber.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I respect it because that's intentional. Because it's a parody. It's like I was saying with Mystery Science Theater. Is Manos the Hands of Fate a terrible movie? Yes. Is Mystery Science Theater episode number whatever, Manos the Hands of Fate? Is that a terrible movie? No, probably not. Even though it contains the main elements of one of the worst movies ever. But it's something repackaged and it's something new that I can kind of get behind because you don't see it every day. It's not original, but you don't see it all the time. And so it is a little bit more unique.
Yeah, it's refreshing.
It is refreshing. And so this movie probably deserves to be low rated.
So, yes, well, I think it might deserve the 1 star. It's still fun to watch.
It still has its merits.
Yeah.
Right. I guess
So yes, it does deserve the 1 star, but that does
not make it a horrible movie.
It does not make it a bad movie, and it doesn't take away its watchworthiness.
Yes.
It's still watchworthy.
Yes. Just probably not all the time.
Not all the time.
Although I'm sure there's a handful of people out there who say, you know, that's my favorite movie. I watch it all the time. Well, great. I'm glad for you.
Props to you.
I mean, I would just like to point out, this is kind of what came to me as we started watching this film. So this movie came out in 2002. There's another very famous homage to Kung Fu films that came out in 2003, and its second part came out a year or two later. I think a year later.
Yeah, it was pretty soon after.
Kill Bill, Volumes 1 and 2. That's a weird comparison to make, to say this movie is anything like Kill Bill, right? This kind of sounds crazy.
At first glance, yeah.
At first glance. But basically my thought process is, here is 2 very different examples of filmmakers who really, really, really loved and respected the martial arts action film genre.
Yes.
And really wanted to make a film that would pay homage to this genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, Kill Bill is an example of a big budget, critically acclaimed, well-received blockbuster, made a lot of money, I believe, I'm sure.
I'm sure it did.
And certainly contains elements of a classic kind of the Kung Fu tropes. You know, she gets sent off to the train with the ancient master, and there's a lot of like
and there's
sword
always
fighting,
a revenge
and
plot.
there's revenge and ninjas, all kinds of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
This, a totally other direction. Low budget, kind of getting back to the roots of, but in the funny way, some of the things that are ridiculous, but that you love.
Mm-hmm.
Continuity errors, bad dubbing, just kind of fun. It's stupid, but it's fun. This is going to be a ridiculous comparison, but go with it. As far as what I was saying about Kill Bill.
Uh-huh.
I see it as, imagine you have 2 people who really love Chinese food. Like, not just like Panda Express. Maybe they started out, they loved, you know, had takeout and Panda Express growing up, but they decided, I really love Chinese food. It's my favorite food. I want to like go learn in China how to make Chinese food.
Mm-hmm.
Kill Bill is like the 3-star chef who trained under the great chefs in China and then like comes back to the West and has his like high concept fine dining restaurants that, like, you know, serves elevated versions of traditional kind of Chinese peasant dishes.
Yeah.
Whereas Kung Pao is more like, this guy just went to some grandma in China and learned how to make like this peasant dish. And was like, this is awesome, and brings it back home and just makes it for friends and family. And some people are like, this is disgusting because it's, you know,
like that episode
made of uncommon ingredients.
Delicious,
yeah, exactly.
Where he has the whatever it is, the chewy thing,
yeah,
and he's like, I can't eat this, and she's like, no, it's so good.
Yeah, exactly. So Kung Pao is the more, I don't care. I'm not trying to create a, you know, high-end concept, whatever. I just want to enjoy this.
Yeah.
And have my own version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of respect that, even though I definitely like the idea of the other end, you know, take the foundational stuff and kind of elevate it to the next level. And I love Kill Bill. I think it's a great film. There's 2 of them. Yes. One in 2 pieces. But
you can like both. You know?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So.
You know, people like their steak, but they like hamburgers too.
Well, people like their I'd say it's more like people like their steak, but they also love corn dogs. Because hamburgers can be pretty elevated. Like, you can get a...
Okay,
there's
fine.
Gordon Ramsay
People
has
like
a burger
steak,
restaurant.
and they still like the McDonald's 79-cent hamburger.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah, more like $1, whatever, 29 nowadays, 79 cents.
Yeah, if you want cheese.
Yeah, maybe back in the
Give me $1
90s, it was
something.
79 cents. Jeez.
All right, I'm old. What do you want from me?
The one segment of those reviews that I strongly disagree with, and this might just be me being pedantic about his wording, but when he makes the comparison to Harry Potter, I'm like, come on, dude.
It was
The abandoned orphan chosen one trope is like 1,000 years old. It's so much older than Harry Potter. I know that this is like a year after the first Harry Potter movie came out, and so it was certainly in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, seriously, King Arthur was an abandoned orphan chosen one.
And that whole
some
Moses
versions.
guy.
Yeah, and Moses. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there you go. That trope is like 5,000 years old. Okay? J.K. Rowling did not invent the orphan chosen one. Luke Skywalker, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Anyway, the point is, it's,
It's been done before.
Stop giving her more credit than she deserves for using generic tropes. Granted, she does repurpose them. That's why she's a great writer.
Thank you for listening to One Star Bazaar. As always, please let us know what you think by reaching out on Facebook or Twitter at One Star Bazaar. You can visit our Patreon page to contribute to the podcast if you like what we're doing. Please rate and subscribe if you're willing. It helps us out and lets us know you're listening.
Next week will be a double episode. We will look at two different films from a popular franchise. One is a reboot, and the other is a sequel. We will not be comparing them to the originals, but asking how watch-worthy they are on their own.